Welcome to episode 31. In the past, I attempted to seal the cabin roofs using canvas, glue and paint. Unfortunately, the canvas still soaked moisture and became mouldy over time. Now that I've removed the canvas and that I've sanded back the paint to expose the planked roof, I can remove any rot to the cabin roof sides, this trim where water found a way to ingress. I'm using a gas blowtorch to help further dry out the wood before I apply any epoxy, to seal the wood of course. I found a tech screw that was used and rusted, which expanded over time as it corroded, allowing more water to ingress, resulting in the wood to rot at a faster rate. So, of course, any tech screws on a wooden boat are the devil, in my eyes. And Bondo or car fillers pretty close to that as well. So I learned the hard way in using car fillers in certain places. And if it's thick, it works well in places. You know, it has its purpose and it does work in timber boats in certain areas. But if there's a lot of movement, of course, it's going to crack. Water's going to get its way in there. Moisture's going to find its way in behind it. And it's not going to do its job. It's hard to believe seeing the condition of this trim in certain places. I mean, it's only a few spots, like 2 spots here, that actually have some rot. One is a direct result of the tech screw being used. And then, of course, with the canvas got wet, it soaked moisture, so therefore water was always sitting on the wood and causing it to rot at a faster rate. So it is hard to believe that only 2 years ago that this trim was bedded. I bedded this trim with my father using Sikaflex, and yeah, again, Sikaflex also is a tricky topic, but it works well in certain places. But if it doesn't have a good bond, water is going to find its way in behind it. So epoxy is the best thing. I've actually learned a lot from Rody on YouTube. This guy is in the States and he's repairing a plywood sailing boat. And he's had to do a lot of plywood repairs, and then he's used epoxy for filling all the seams and filling all the seams using both low density filler and the microfibers. And I mean, that guy is a wealth of knowledge in how to apply epoxy. And that's what I got to try next. I want to try the cup method. He uses like a paper cup, and that gets like the perfect kind of fillet of epoxy using the low density filler. So you got to use quite a lot of that to build up, structural integrity, structural strength. And you definitely check out his channel. I'll put a link in the description below, and go subscribe to him as well. So I've learned a lot from him too. So now that I've dried the trim, I've dried the area using the blowtorch, it's now time to mix up some epoxy, seal the faces of the wood. I'll just brush it on there, get it nice and applied nicely, a nice layer, and then I can come back and thicken my epoxy with the microfibers and get it into the seams and make sure those seams are nice and filled well. I also used the thickened epoxy to glue in the wooden trim or the replacement trim piece. And the reason why I glued the old trim back in place, and a lot of you are going to say, okay, well, you should have replaced that. Well, the wood isn't actually too bad. I mean, it's not funky, it's not right through, it's not 100% rotten, right? But yes, if any of it has any rot, you should really replace it. But I'm getting these jobs done quick, and in my eyes, in my mind, it's good enough. It's that's not going to allow any more water to ingress. Now that I've sealed it with the epoxy and that I've fitted it with the epoxy as well. And afterwards, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to use 9mm plywood and sheet the entire foredeck, or the roof here of the cabin, or the foremost cabin roof, with 9mm plywood. That's going to be glued down with epoxy, thickened epoxy, and then I'm going to fiberglass over that with matte and epoxy. So the reason for this, and maybe it's overkill, a lot of you might say, but looking at the first wheelhouse cabin roof that we've just epoxied with fiberglass, we're seeing that the Sikaflex is still expanding, and you can see it's actually quite bowed through it. If you rub your hand over it, I mean, you can see it even with the naked eye, you can see that it's bowed. So I don't want to do this next cabin roof with just epoxy and fiberglass, and then have a risk of it going belly up or whatever, right? So that's why I'm going to use plywood, and I can come back to the wheelhouse cabin roof if needs be in the future, but let's see how it holds up. Air isn't getting under it. I mean, I'm not seeing any air bubbles. I'm seeing it still secured well, looking at the edge of the cabin roof. So let's see how long it'll last. Maybe it'll last many, many years. So if anybody has any experience using fiberglass over Sikaflex and you have a similar kind of visual look to it, let me know. Let me know if you have any issues in having done that, or if it worked for you guys. But some might say also, and I was thinking this, was to use a reefing hook, remove the Sikaflex from the seams of the roof, and then to fill it with thickened epoxy. But it would just take a serious amount of work, and for the third time, I do not want to have to rake out more Sikaflex. So I think this plywood method and this plywood technique is the way forward. But let me know from your own experience. Let me know your thoughts. I'm applying Epiphane's Multimarine Primer to the fiberglass roof. I did sand this down so that this primer coat would adhere to the roof nicely, and I wiped it down many, many times to make sure there was no contamination or debris on that roof. So, and as you can see, it still had, when we did this, it This is a slow hardener with this epoxy, so the epoxy did absorb some moisture. I mean, on the surface at least, when it was drying. So this is why it has that opaque look to it. And I mean, it's still strong. It's certainly gone off, and it's been well over 2 weeks now since I did that. So the epoxy has cured and it's ready for paint. So I think it's more visual than anything. And seeing as I'm painting over this, it's not a big concern. So I've sanded it down and I'm putting on a layer of Epiphane's Multimarine Primer. I'm just using up what I have in the tin. I don't have enough to do the entire roof, unfortunately, and I have more ordered on the way. So there's 2 more tins on the way, and that will get me onto the next roof, so not to worry. And this will be followed up with a monourethane by Epiphane's also. So once again, it's time to tackle the cabin sides where the cabin meets the deck. So I raked out any old Sikaflex that was in here, and also I filleted this with trim or some slips of timber in the past. And again, you know, I'd found that water had found its way inside. So to tackle that, I made sure to follow up with thickened epoxy using the microfibers. And again, I'll come back on this with the low density filler then, so I'll have a nice gradual gradient, and when I'm ready to glass the deck, the mat will curve lovely and adhere to that curve and take that curve nicely. where the sliding door goes in place, there's a small trim in the cabin there. So this is kind of like a support. There's also going to be 2 single pane windows that will go in place to the port and starboard side of the wheelhouse cabin. They'll go in there in the future, but for now we just have plywood in place to seal up those windows. But this little trim anyway on this section, it has it rotted over time. Water got in there. God knows how water got in there. Only God knows. So I raked it all out, got back to good wood, and then I applied some epoxy, and then I thickened it up and with the low density filler and got that in place. It looks messy, definitely it looks messy. I'm going to sand this down once it's dry and apply more and get a nice sharp edge on there, get a nice 90 degree, and it'll match in with the rest once it's painted. So not to worry with aesthetics just yet. And then the rain happened. So it was time to wrap up, and I worked a little bit through the rain. I just used the blowtorch here to kick off the epoxy, allowing it to set up quicker. So that's all for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe if you have not subscribed already. There'll be more videos in the near future, and I will try my best to get them out weekly. Even despite all the rain, we're going to try and work under the rain. We'll make like a cover system that we can continue and adapt to the Irish temperate climate. And so I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please do leave a like. I also have a PayPal link in the description below if you feel like further supporting my project there. That would be greatly appreciated. As always, guys, stay productive and have fun creating. I will see you in the next episode.